It was a really small plane. It's been 20 years now, but I still remember it. It was an early morning flight from Kansas City to Chicago, small plane, and it was me and like a girls' softball team, like a bunch of 14-year-old girls with a few parents and a few coaches. And it was probably the most frightening flight I've ever been on. It was just really stormy, and it was bouncing up and down, and some of the girls were really frightened. And I remember at some point saying to one of the moms, I guess you're going to Chicago for like a championship game. And she said, oh no, we play all our games in Chicago. And I remember, this is before all the traveling teams. I remember thinking, well, you're the stupidest person I've ever met. And I didn't say that. I remember thinking, oh my God, what a fool. It's easier to see other people's excess, right, than your own. Because I think also about when my son was in maybe 5th or 6th grade and he got a chance to be in like accelerated advanced math. And all that meant was that in the summer he had to do this math packet every day and show up at school an hour early for a kid who would never show up on school on time. But of course we had to do it, and that was the most miserable choice that we ever made, right? But it is so hard to pull yourself back from more, acquire more, be more, do more, because it is baked into our culture, right? It is just baked in. Daniel Susskind, who is an economist at Oxford and King's College in London, has written a very interesting book called Growth, A History and a Reckoning. And it's about the history of growth in this country, economic growth in the world, and GDP, gross domestic product, and how that's measured and how it hasn't always been measured. So, basic point, for 300,000 years, the first 300,000 years of human existence, there was basically no economic growth, right? You were a hunter and gatherer, like your parents were hunter-gatherers, like they were, and then after that you were a peasant farmer, like the people before you were peasant farmers, like the people before you were, and there were short bouts of growth in that 300,000, like I guess when they discovered fire, right, or invented the wheel, and then there'd be this like growth, but then it would always pull back. Until about 250 years ago, Industrial Revolution, when of course we know growth has been like that, right? But even that growth really only started to be measured, which I didn't really ever think about, even though I was a business major, about 75 years ago. And it kind of grew out of the Second World War when President Roosevelt was trying to decide how much of the American economy could be shifted to war economy, which meant they had to go, well, how much is the economy? And so then they started thinking about measuring it. Roosevelt was really trying to make a case that we weren't just going to send men to war, some women to war, but that we were going to send the machinery of war, or that we were going to manufacture and make it. So from the very beginning, though, which I didn't know, there was discrepancy among economists about whether all the weapons and all the bullets and all the armor should be included in the gross domestic product. There are people like John Keynes, you know, Keynes that we learned about, who believed absolutely. And then there was a guy who won a Nobel laureate in economics in 1971. His name was Simon Kuznets, who believed none of that stuff should be counted in the GDP because it wasn't a social good. He also didn't think advertising and cigarette smoking and all that. Well, the people who believed that the military-industrial complex should be figured into the GDP certainly won out, right? And in part because then, of course, we went into what? Cold War. And then there was a real emphasis on showing that capitalism was a heck of a lot better than communism, so you'd better believe we were going to count all the military stuff we were creating, right? But so now you have people like Daniel Susskind, and I mean the dialogue's been going on for a while, who are saying, look at all this growth and at what cost. Certainly the growth has paid off, right? Much longer lifestyles, much healthier, life expectancy is so much longer. I mean, thankfully, of course, because women generally have care for their reproductive lives, and that's why a lot of women used to die, we know that. But, you know, people live longer, they live healthier. Certainly, you know, most of us are happy for running water and electricity, and we don't have to wash our clothes in the river, right, or haul water in like my grandparents did from a well. But it's come at a cost, right, which is like the destruction of the earth. I mean, extinction of species and massive social inequality like you never used to have, and, you know, dislocation of communities and anxiety and stress and all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of people are saying, well, maybe there are other indexes of things we should measure, like HDI, Human Development Index, which does measure life expectancy as opposed to what we produce, and it measures education attainment, and it measures standard of living. Other people are like, we need to have a factor where we factor in carbon emissions, and also things like savings, like how many people in the country have $1,000, right, in case they have a disaster. But long before there were economists asking these big questions, there was the wisdom of Proverbs. And they were asking about what it means, what growth should look like, how you should live in your life. And they were asking that question, again, creation spirituality, that's what the wisdom is about. They were saying, what do you know about the world from looking? And we've talked about this, right? Wisdom is about, what do you know from looking at the way the world works? That there are cycles, in the morning, evening, fall, winter, spring, summer, that there is, even as bad as things might seem, there is this confidence and this trust in the way God has created this world that you can count on, right? That we can rest in. And then what do you learn from looking at the animals? We're looking at how the bears and the badgers and the ants, what they do, and they get mad or happy or industrious. What does that teach us? And what does it teach us from watching the wisest among us? I mean, the people that we like to be around. I was with one of our young people this week from Peace, and she said, just talking about her job, and she said, but I'm not, our generation, we're not like the other people. I don't live to work, right? I mean, it's not just older people who can teach us. The younger people have got some pretty dadgum good ideas about what some of us have done and how we really should live on this earth. But so when it comes to growth and lifestyle and all that, the word from Proverbs is this: moderation. Moderation. Better spinach with love than meat with quarrel, right? Better to have a loaded baked potato, and everybody be really happy, than lobster and steak and everybody be super stressed. I mean, it's not so much about diet, really, and health, so much as it is about how do we structure our lives in a way so that we are not in the rat race all the time, but we are living a just and caring life. And it's not just about having a pleasant home life. It's also, as you heard, about the overall world, right? Like that one about little with peace as opposed to a lot with injustice. It's like better is little with fear of the Lord than treasure with trouble. So it's like better to come up with an economic system where everybody can be okay than a system where a few people have so much that they have barricaded themselves and built their tunnels under the earth and flown off in rocket ships while people are, having an uprising in the street, right? So it's this kind of idea about just balance and living a healthier life. And you go on, and a proverb down the way says, kind of gives a little more instruction. Give me neither riches nor poverty, lest rich I forget thee, or poor I scorn thee, right? You can have so much that you think, well, look at me, look at all I did. And you can have so little that, of course, you're just in desperate situations. So every year we have this stewardship time, which I know is what everyone looks forward to. When we ask people to think about, what can you pledge, and we have a couple of pledge Sundays, it's a pretty low pressure thing. But at its best, it's an invitation to look at your own values. It's an opportunity to stop and say, look at your last credit card statement and look at your calendar. Look at your credit card statement and say, really, right? Did I want to do that? Does that reflect who I am? Should I stop that recurring contribution or payment? And your calendar, how do I spend my days, right? Because your days become your months, which become your years, which at the end become your life. Is that really what I want to do? So it's this season of wisdom, which is not an easy thing to do. It sounds easier, but we are not a people who are encouraged to be mindful and thoughtful. We're encouraged to be a people who just click and click and click and click and buy and buy and buy. Some of you have heard me tell this, that 35 years ago, and I was a young pastor in this town, my best friend was a rabbi, Rabbi Sharon Henry, who unfortunately moved far away, but we still stay in touch. And when we became friends, and it was in the late 80s, I became a vegetarian, which I've been a vegetarian now for 35 years. She wasn't a vegetarian, and she didn't keep kosher as a Reform rabbi, but she followed some of the Jewish laws. She didn't eat meat and milk together. And I can remember being at a restaurant, and she wouldn't order a cheeseburger. And I remember sometimes her looking, trying to figure it out, and just that thoughtfulness. And we talked about it. And I remember she said at the time, because, Reformed Jews, they don't just follow all these laws. It has to make sense. She said, I do this because it adds meaning to my life. So for me, and you've heard me say this, giving up meat was not a big sacrifice. But it was something I could do. I knew it was better for me. I knew it was better for the earth. And I was telling Joe, I wonder how many thousands of dollars I've saved in 35 years because of eating beans instead of beef, right? But what it's done for me is simplify my life, which is not a bad thing. You've heard me say Obama had 2 suits, black and gray, right? Obama eliminated every single choice he could. He made his life so simple because he had to make all these huge choices, right? So you wanted to get rid of anything extraneous. So some ways you go in a restaurant, there's 3 things you can choose from instead of 30. It's not as stressful, right? But also, it has in a slight way added meaning. A slight way made me think about people whose choices are limited every day, right? Women whose lives I cannot imagine, who are trying to decide between feeding their kids or buying them clothes, that kind of thing. But then, the beginning of this year, I've been thinking again about, a lot of people's incomes are flat and inflation's insane. And I love iced tea. I'm from Texas. I'm a big iced tea person. I see a lot of people in coffee shops, since we don't have a building. Iced tea is $5 in a coffee shop. It's just ridiculous. I don't like iced tea that much. I like a cranberry scone, $5 maybe, but not iced tea. So I figured, if I take a water bottle, I can save $25 a week, which is $100 a month, which is $1,200 a year. Do you know how many mosquito nets you can buy for $1,200? I've talked to you about this. You can buy 1,000 mosquito nets, and 1 or 2 people under the mosquito net, that's 1,500 people not going to get malaria this year. So to choose water instead of iced tea, I can help 1,500 people not get malaria this year, right? Now, that's just a really small, simple thing, and that's about the only thing I can think of to cut out right now. So maybe you all have other ideas or thoughts. But the point here is to just think about it, right? To just stop and think before you just do. Why don't you have more money to do things you really like to do, like go to the Royals games? If those of you who follow the Royals, and I know not everybody does, but this was not a good week, okay? They were 0 for 6. They were 0 for 5 at home. A month ago, they were at the top of the division, tied with Cleveland for one day. Now they're maybe on the verge of not even making it into the wild card. But Tuesday night, we were out there, and I saw something. It's one of those things that makes me think of when I was in a beautiful museum in Paris one time, and I heard a woman say to her husband, looking at this gorgeous Matisse painting, put this into your heart. And this was one of those things that I put into my heart. It was right in front of us. There was this father with this little 3-year-old girl. She's a little bitty thing. She looked more like 2. I had seen him before, a few weeks before, sitting behind us with a little boy. And it turns out they're twins. Turns out they're 3. He had brought the little girl. This is the thing. The little girl, first of all, cutest little thing. She had this curly brown hair and these big brown eyes. She had this giant royal blue bow. And let me just say no to all the parents. I could have had 50 kids. I would have never had a kid with this kid's temperament. She was just so sweet and kind and watching every single thing. And she was just like so into the game. And the dad was like, yeah, she's following it. I brought her to 2 games. This was the thing that was so amazing about the whole thing. It was just the father and the little girl in his lap. I mean, he didn't have anything else. He didn't have a diaper bag. He didn't have a backpack. He didn't have a clear plastic bag like me. He didn't have anything except for that little bitty girl on his lap. So I decided he must work here. He's got an office back somewhere. He has just come down here, right? That is what I had decided. I want you to picture this guy. He was just sitting there and his daughter on his lap and just the skin, the way they were, and she was just watching the game. Finally, about the 6th inning, they jumped up. It was like potty break maybe, but they dashed out. When they came back down, they had this, I didn't know they made ice cream that small, tiny little bitty blue helmet with ice cream in it. 1 spoon. He didn't have any napkins. The guy, I guess that's the reason, we have this and this, right? But just watching that little girl. And then it wasn't until about the 8th inning, I kid you not, when you know what, the phone came out. Who could blame them? I was about ready to get up and walk out of the damn Royals games. And you seemed like all she knew how to use was the camera feature. She was kind of waving around. And I just thought about that. It was just so unbelievably sweet. Better spinach with love than meat with coral. Better just a little bit. It was another stadium, and it was in March of 1968. Bobby Kennedy was running to be the president, running for the Democratic nominee to be the president 3 months before he was assassinated. And he had flown to K-State to give the Landon lecture. It's a serious lecture. He was talking about Vietnam. He was talking about how he had come to a decision at least the month before that there was no winning this, that we were going to have to find a diplomatic solution, that we had to stop by scaling back, getting our soldiers out of there, and then finding a way to live in peace. And then that afternoon, he had flown to KU, which was a more off-the-cuff speech. It was funny. It was brilliant. Obama says one of the best speeches. It really was fun. You should really look the speech up. And he started by saying that he had to come to KU because the K-State students really wanted him to bring their love. You know, it was like that. The whole funny. It was just really funny. I mean, like he knew what he was doing, right? And then, of course, he talked about Vietnam. And then in Kennedy-esque style, he talked about the impact of poverty. He talked about what he had seen in the Mississippi Delta, what he'd seen in Appalachia, what he'd seen in the slums of Chicago. And then, in this part of the speech, was largely forgotten until the last few years when it's really kind of come to be something cited. He talked about what it means to be an American. For too much and for too long, we have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product is now over $800 billion a year, but if we judge the United States of America by that, the gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for our people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder and chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm and counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, or the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And he went on to talk about what it means to be an American, what we truly value about being American. He went on to talk about, that quote, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We are coming into a season of decisions, right? As we make pledges, as we go to our polling places to vote. And we are asked to ask deeply what really matters to us. What do we really value? Who do we really want to be? What do we want to offer our children? May this be a season of wisdom. May we look carefully about this earth, about all the creatures great and small we are called to care for. May we learn from one another, that we may move into this future wise and hopeful, closer to the image that God has called us to live. Amen.